bolt action, and this is how it works. Let her rip, Private. Division, when they came ashore on June 7th, the standard issue infantry rifle used by Americans at the time was not that weapon. The standard issue infantry rifle at the time was a weapon adopted in the United States military in the year 1936. The M1 30 caliber rifle, often called the Garand after the man that designed the weapon, a man by the name of John Cantius Garand that worked at Springfield Armory in Massachusetts. The M1 is a 9.5-pound semi-automatic weapon, meaning that when you load a clip of ammunition into the weapon, all you have to do is close the action on that clip, point, pull the trigger. The expanding gases of the exploding gun reload, fire. Bring the gate. And that is the weapon that armed most infantrymen. There's a further important distinction of the M1 Garand rifle. It was basically one of a kind. Of all the major world powers fought in the Second World War, only one nation began M1A1, a folding stock version, the one that you see here. Hold that up there. The M1 carbine, like the M1 Garand, is a semi-automatic weapon, meaning all the shooter had to do was put a 15-round box magazine in the weapon, work the action, take the weapon off of safety, and open fire. And that's the M1 carbine. M1 carbines were carried by officers, NCOs, weapons used by American forces during the Second World War. This weapon, though, was adopted right before the outbreak of war, 1941. The United States was still, and you see right here. All right, everyone, what's BAR stand for? Every damn one of you just knew the answer to that. This is a great day. I'm proud of you guys. What better way to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the invasion than to come out, know about the BAR, and what being fired for you? A note about this soldier's uniform. He's in the camouflage herringbone drill uniform that was being worn by soldiers of the 17th Armored Engineer Battalion. They fought and fed from a 20-round detachable box magazine, firing the same 30 caliber cartridge as the M1 rifle. And this is the BAR and fast fire mode. The machine gun was first developed privately, but then ultimately adopted by the United States military. The military was using a version called the M1928A1, the weapon you see right here. The M1928A1 had a receiver of solid steel. It had a finned barrel. It had a cuts compensator, a highly sophisticated compensator, and then a very sophisticated Lyman rear sight. These weapons being produced by Auto Ordnance in Connecticut and Savage Arms in New York. The government sought a new version of the Thompson that could be produced less expensively, and came up with this weapon here, the M1A Thompson. The M1 Thompsons were in the hands of almost all NCOs and some officers at the time of the Normandy invasion, both 1928 A1s and then the less expensive M1s. Okay. every single person who can do that. You guys are outstanding. I couldn't be happier. The M3 grease gun fired the same 45 caliber automatic Colt pistol cartridge. It fired like the Thompson from a 30-round detachable box magazine, and then also like the M1 Thompson, it fired as a simple blowback design, firing from an open bolt. The grease gun is it has one important difference from the Thompson, and that's cyclic rate of fire. The Thompson fires at a higher rate. That's how quickly the cartridges are fired. The grease gun has a much slower sort of woodpecker rate of fire, which you'll hear right now. Let her rip. As the M1 rifle, as the Browning automatic rifle, firing those cartridges from cloth belts. As you see the gun, as you see the teams loading, there's a gunner and an assistant gunner. The gunner would carry the 36 pound in 1919. The assistant gunner would carry the tripod and extra ammunition. By placing the belt in the weapon and interacting with the bolt, the weapon was ready to fire. Let her rip, guys. The 30 caliber machine gun was a highly effective weapon. It was used by the infantry, it was used on vehicles, but there was still yet another belt-fed machine gun used in World War II. This weapon, in the year 1919, and this is John Browning's 50 caliber machine gun M2. The M2 50 caliber machine gun fired 50 caliber cartridges from a belt of disintegrating metallic links. Loading the weapon was very similar to the 30 caliber machine guns in that you laid the cartridges in a feed path, close the top cover, work the action once, work the action again, and open fire. That weapon was adopted in 1919. That weapon is approaching 100 years old. That weapon served your military in World War II. It served your military in Korea. It served your military in Vietnam. In the Gulf War in 1991, that weapon equips vehicles today fighting in Iraq. That's a pretty good design with that kind of longevity. But we also wanted to top off our show today to demonstrate another little piece of equipment for you.
Hold on to your heads.
At times it was necessary for infantry to defend against armor. And for that reason, the military would deploy what was called an anti-tank rifle. This was a weapon with a long barrel, a rifled barrel, that could fire a projectile at a sufficient velocity to penetrate armor. At the beginning of the war, the United States military was using this weapon, the M3A1 37mm anti-tank gun. It fired a 37mm projectile of the type you see me holding here. Now this weapon would not have been particularly effective against German armor. German armor in the Second World War was of extremely high quality. German armor was thick. 37mm shells would often not do any damage to them. And it was for that reason that this weapon saw very little combat in the European theater and North Africa. However, against Japanese, the 37mm anti-tank was perfectly adequate. That's because the Japanese would use these things that they called tanks. They were really glorified trucks. And against very light armor, the 37mm anti-tank gun was absolutely lethal. That's why you see this weapon being used frequently in the Pacific theater. This weapon was used for the first time by the U.S. forces in August and September of 1942 on a little island in the British Solomons called Guadalcanal. This is the 37mm anti-tank gun in action. Roll it, boys. Kick it. Good man. Put it in. Put your ass behind it. Well, these were weapons that were being used by the forces of your military 60 years ago in France during the liberation of that country, when 150,000 personnel of a multinational allied coalition landed by parachute, glider, and landing craft in Normandy. We appreciate you coming out today to commemorate the 60th anniversary.
Well, y'all just talking. I just want to get you just stand there. If you want to demonstrate what you're
The mission of the 505th was to capture and occupy this city, and the initial reports that we are receiving is that that has been done, that the 505th officially captured St. Mary shortly after 2 a.m. That makes this city the first city in France to be liberated. And 101st, in addition to capturing beach exits and river crossings, is to interfere with the way the enemy reacts. Just like the 6th Airborne over here is preventing 21st Panzer from moving up and threatening the Flank Division, which was just moved into the peninsula last month. This division is a complete new arrival, and for your information, a Luftwaffe division, heavy anti-aircraft resources. They also have labor battalions that are supposed to construct obstacles in glider landing zones and parachute drop zones. They moved in last month, and we think that we have gotten in before they've gotten much of that work done, so that many of the areas that we have designated here, particularly in the vicinity of the village of Amsterdam, they still have not had obstacles placed in them. We do know that the 91st Division brought in a particularly heavy anti-aircraft concentration in this area right about here. That heavy cloud bank was formed on the west coast of the peninsula, so that as the aircraft made their final approach to the drop zones,
Almighty God, upon this great and noble undertaking. Today in this building, dedicated to that noble undertaking, we thank God for the victory of that crusade, which continues to bring peace with justice and freedom for friend and foe alike. We remember also at this time President Ronald Reagan, who completed the liberation of Europe by the total defeat of communism. And we ask, of course, that the good Lord will give him rest. We also remember, too, all of our wonderful military in Iraq, surrender of the rights purchased by the armed forces, especially those who merited the greatest acclaim of all. Greater love than this no man has, that he lay down his life for his friend. And so, in conformity with our national motto, in God we trust, we promise to keep alive the memory of all of those veterans symbolized in this collection, so that this nation will merit the praise of Scripture. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Amen.
Well,
Good morning. Thank you, Jackie, for that kind introduction. Before we go on with our program, I would like to ask us to keep in our hearts and prayers the memory of President Ronald Reagan, who left this earth yesterday and who left a tremendous legacy of love for our veterans, and a magnificent tribute goes to him and through him to those men and women who served us so bravely. I'm extremely proud to be with you today to commemorate one of the most important days of the history of the 20th century. And I join you in honoring the men and women of World War II, and especially those who waged the most famous amphibious invasion in the history of the world. It's fitting that we gather in this wonderful museum today to commemorate the courage, the valor, and the sacrifice of those soldiers, those sailors, the airmen, and the Marines who fought during World War II. I realize there are millions who are focused on the beaches and cemeteries in Normandy this weekend, but our National Museum right here in Louisiana is making a tremendous contribution to an understanding of all aspects of World War II. This is where future generations of Americans will learn the lessons of the war and hear the oral histories of the servicemen and women and home front workers in their own voices. And these stories are so moving and so profound. We're standing now in the center that has become America's storehouse of history for all of World War II. I'm proud that it's located here in Louisiana and here in the great city of New Orleans, where more than 1.25 million people have visited since you opened your doors on June 6, 2000. And your success has inspired plans for an expansion that has been officially recognized by Congress last fall when it designated the museum as America's National World War II Museum. It was my privilege to represent the state of Louisiana 4 years ago as we dedicated the museum along with your founder, Dr. Stephen Ambrose, and Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg, Tom Brokaw, and tens of thousands of veterans of D-Days in Italy, North Africa, France, and throughout the Pacific Theater. I remember so vividly the pictures of the veterans. As I watched them, their pride just emanated from their hearts. Their families were so proud. There was so much emotion in the proceedings, and this united our community in ways that we had rarely seen. It expressed its thanks with an outpouring of gratitude and emotion that was so welcomed by our veterans, even though it was 50 years after D-Day. That scene was repeated on December 7th, 2001, as we dedicated the Pacific exhibit. On that day, we honored the veterans who fought in vicious battles on islands that were unknown at the time, but have become so familiar to us now. Names like Guadalcanal, Okinawa, and Iwo Jima. What linked those invasions around the world? And the reason this museum is located in New Orleans and not in New York or Washington was the vision and the workmanship of one of our own, Andrew Jackson Higgins. It was this very Mr. Higgins who conceived, developed, and supervised the production of more than 20,000 landing craft that brought our brave soldiers and Marines on shore during the war. The replica sits in this room with us. General Eisenhower said that Mr. Higgins and his 30,000 Louisiana workers made the difference in the war. There were hundreds of thousands of our state's citizens serving in the military all over the world, but there were just as many back home doing their part to support the war. The building of the Higgins landing craft was perhaps the most vivid example of the contribution. But Louisiana has played a pivotal role in the U.S. military history for more than 2 centuries. Since the Revolutionary War, more than 14 million Americans, many of whom were from Louisiana, have served the nation's military. And more than 1 million of those American warriors, again, many from Louisiana, died in combat, paying the ultimate price to secure our freedom and our way of life. American history is replete with stories leaders from the 256th Infantry Brigade of the Louisiana Army National Guard as they were about to leave us for Fort Hood and then for deployment overseas, probably to Iraq. And just 2 months before that day, I had an opportunity to visit our troops in Iraq myself. Over several days, I talked with the men and the women from Louisiana and from other states about their service on behalf of their country. I was inspired by their positive attitudes and their dedication to helping each other, as well as helping their units to achieve their missions. As we commemorate the invasions of our successful and liberating efforts of World War II, these men and women of today are facing the uncertainty that comes to any soldier, sailor, or Marine of any previous war. But as I looked into the faces of our Louisiana men and women, I saw the resolve that these citizen soldiers do to their duty, and they want to return home, and we want them to come home safe and sound. They want to be with their families as soon as possible, and we want this conflict to be resolved as soon as possible so that we can have these reunions. What I told our band of brothers and sisters on those 2 occasions, and what so many of you know only too well, is that their contributions are appreciated by everyone who draws the breath of freedom, that we appreciate the sacrifices that they're making. They feel today what so many of you in this audience felt during World War II. God knows that no one likes war, but it is sometimes necessary. And throughout our history, our citizens have understood that duty to country may cause a man or woman to risk his or her life to try and make a difference. We're commemorating the victory in Europe that began with the Normandy invasion on June 6th. And I believe celebrating the spirit of Americans that makes us so unique in the world is important. We love freedom, and we fight to sustain it. Along with the 4 million people of Louisiana, I pay tribute to you who participated in the invasions of World War II, those who helped the war effort at home by building those 20,000 Higgins boats, and to those who are now known as the greatest generation. You showed us how to work together. You showed us how to sacrifice, how to be courageous, how to be humble, and how to rebuild the world. And we need all those lessons today. This museum will ensure that your work during that time will always be remembered. I have no doubt that your service will continue to inspire young Americans to continue to serve our country. It is essential that we have young people of today who have the same heart and courage as those of yesterday. Stephen Ambrose, a friend of mine, liked to say that when youngsters meet World War II veterans and hear about their service, they would think to themselves, could I have done that? And you could almost hear the veterans' thoughts. Kid, you and I are both children of democracy, and I know that if the challenge comes, you too will fight for democracy. And today we have those young people fighting for democracy. But Stephen knew that this museum would connect generations to each other. He wanted the D-Day Museum to teach the children all the lessons of war and sacrifice. He said, we do what we can, which is quite a lot, to inspire them to be the successors of those who helped to make this country into the freest and richest nation that ever was. Thank you for inviting me to join you on this special occasion. And let us remember all of the lessons that the veterans of the Normandy invasion and all of the invasions that followed what lessons they have given us. And we thank and appreciate all of you.
God bless you, and God bless this great country.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here today for several reasons, one of which is to show you the 4.2 mortar and tell you a little bit about it, because it was not just in our opinion, we mortar people, but all the people that we supported. And we supported 14 different divisions between 6 June and 44 and 8 May 45. It is truly an outstanding weapon, even though it's not with the troops anymore. They've redone it, and I'm told that it is an excellent weapon. But anyway, it did a fine job for us. But everything wasn't exactly 100% with us, like all units, so I don't want you to go away thinking that we thought we were the best. The first big mistake we made was Friday, the night I asked word, we're going to go in the morning, and we're going down this rope ladder, and we're crawling these salt boats, and we're going to circle until it's time for us to go in. And my particular unit was scheduled to go in the 6th wave. And my lieutenant, I was a sergeant, platoon sergeant at that time. I did all the work, I thought anyway. But the came to me and says, one of the boys wants to shoot the weapon from this boat, from their boat. You want to do it? I said, no way, buddy. I don't want to do that. I want a way to get on land to shoot. So he was 3 or 4 boats down from us, and they set it up, and they set her go, let her go. Sound loud as they did out here this morning. And if that English Channel it doesn't have a bottom, it's still going, because it took itself and all the other equipment with it. It blew through the 1st through the 5th was still on the shore. They had run into a bunch of landmines and machine gun nests, this sort of thing. And of course, we were the 6th wave then to be all bundled up there. And a little guy by the name of Teddy Roosevelt, who was the assistant division commander of the 4th Infantry Division, was out there, and he didn't have anything but a walking stick. Little bitty guy, about 5'4", 6". And he was after him, said, let's go, men, we got to go, get out of here. And I had one of my ammunition carriers over there, and that water in the English Channel is cold. And it's cold in August. And we were cold, we had on the chemical treated suits, and that didn't make it any better. But we was there waiting for our turn to go in, ready to go, and General Roosevelt came.
Like I say, functional weapons. They all work most of the time.
So that's an MG?
MG-34.
MG-34.
And like I say, later on in the war, they went to the MG-42, which is, I don't see one laying around here anywhere, but we got a few of them laying around somewhere.
And what is this?
That's an MP-44. That's the first assault weapon that the Germans came up with.
What is this that you're holding?
MG-34. It's an early war belt bed.
Is it real?
Yeah. Yes, it's all real.
So this is a reproduction. But all the other weapons are all...
11th Company's, the 2nd SS Das Reich unit, which is a unit that pretty much served on every front. They served in France and Russia, mainly Russia. And all throughout the war, from, I think it was like, they were formed in 40 all the way to 45.
What got you interested in being a German soldier?
I was always interested in, World War II. The Germans got the coolest stuff, the best weapons, the Adidas helmets, the best bikes. Yeah. But like I say, I do many time periods. I've got an American Airborne, infantry, Marine. So you can't have cowboys without Indians, so we play the Indians.
What we're going to show you right now are the weapons that they carried with them that night. It's our allies that also jumped, notably the British 6th Airborne Division, The British 6th Airborne would land by glider and land by parachute on the far eastern... Number 4 Mark III, not Mark 1, excuse me. The number 4 Mark 1... We're back, sorry. The short, this British .303 caliber cartridge, American 30-06. It fired from an internal box. Now these men were also armed with sidearms. Equipped American forces was the Colt M19A1 .45 caliber automatic pistol. A weapon adopted into U.S. military service in 1911 and some changes and World War II. It fired a .45 caliber 86. That equipped American forces during the Second World War. The M1 Garand. Get out here, man. Move. Come on, look alive. Someone move. The M1 rifle was one of the most effective weapons designed in the Second World War. And all the soldier had to do was place that clip right there on the weapon. Close the action. Put the weapon on safety. The weapon was a semi-automatic rifle, meaning that for each pull of the trigger, the exploding gases, the expanding gases of the exploding forced the action to operate, so that the shooter did not have to bring it down. He did not have to manually operate the weapon. All he had to do was point and pull it. And that's the... Paratroopers were also equipped with a different version of the weapon. Now let's talk about automatic weapons. All right. Let me hear a... That's what I'm talking about. The United States military made use of a large number of automatic weapons during the Second World War, especially submachine guns. We would principally use two types of submachine. Submachine gun was adopted before the war began. It fired a .45 caliber cartridge, the same caliber cartridge, the M1911A1 pistol. Thompsons came in a number of varieties. Before the war began, there was a expensive version of the Thompson submachine gun, the M1928A1. Approximately $100 to produce a single M1928A1 Thompson. This led the government to ultimately strip the design down and cheapen its production, resulting in the M1A1 Thompson. This weapon was streamlined production, and these weapons could be produced by the United States government for as little as $48 per example, half the cost of an M1928A1. Fully automatic fire. Fully automatic means the weapon will continue to fire cartridges until you release the trigger or it runs out of ammunition. To begin with, we're going to fire an M1A1 and then go to a 28. They all basically operate the same. Open fire. The government, though, sought to adopt a weapon that was even less expensive than the least expensive M1A1 Thompson. Remember, M1928A1 Thompsons were costing approximately $100. Stripped down mass production M1A1 Thompsons were costing about $48. That was still too much money. It took too much time and it cost too much. Well, you see now the submachine guns that were used by the airborne during the Normandy battle, but there was still another weapon. All right, stay up here just a second. Stay right where you are. June 9th, 1942. Elements of the 325th Lighter Infantry Regiment were thrown into attack against German positions around a little village called Kokini. Those men were dressed exactly as this man is. He's basically dressed as a regular infantryman, including infantryman trousers, leggings, a jacket. You'll notice he's wearing an 82nd Airborne Division patch. The 325th was delivered to the battlefield by gliders, and they fought in several vicious engagements in Normandy, one of which was the June 9th battle at Topigny. As he was changing magazines, he was struck by 2 bullets. He fell to one knee, and from one knee, he continued to fire. He changed magazines again, fired a 3rd magazine. As he was changing and loading his 4th magazine with 2 bullets in him, he was finally struck down and killed by German fire. And these are the weapons. This is the iron that was in the hands of American paratroopers when each of them reached that solitary moment of either stepping out of the door or releasing their glider. And these weapons were in the hands of American paratroopers, just about 12,000 of them, 60 years ago right now, as they prepared to go to battle in Normandy. The next presentation that's going to take place is a brief